Power recognizes power, even when it pretends not to. Nia Carter had not flown 13 hours to Seoul to be intimidated. She came for expansion, for growth, for proof that a black woman from Atlanta could sit at any global table and belong there. The partnership opportunity with one of Seoul's most discreet luxury hotel chains could elevate her fashion brand into international territory. What she didn't know was that the quiet hotel empire was secretly owned by Joon-Woo, one of the most feared underworld figures in the city. The first time they stood face to face, it wasn't cinematic. It was chaotic. A collision of rushed footsteps in a private corridor led to coffee staining the crisp sleeve of Joon-Woo's tailored suit. Security froze. The air thickened. In Seoul, powerful men were not inconvenienced without consequences. Nia looked up at him, heart racing but spine straight. "I'm not bowing," she said calmly. "But I will pay for the cleaning." The audacity startled him more than the spill. Joon-Woo was accustomed to fear, lowered eyes, trembling apologies, calculated politeness. But Nia Carter met his gaze directly, as if he were simply another businessman blocking her path. He dismissed his guards with a flick of his hand. "It's only coffee," he replied evenly. But it wasn't. It was the first crack in a carefully controlled world. Later that evening, during a high-level negotiation meeting, he watched her command the room with intelligence and unfiltered honesty. She spoke about sustainability, inclusion, and legacy, concepts foreign to a man who ruled through secrecy and intimidation. For the first time in years, Joon-Woo felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Curiosity. And Nia, though unaware of his true identity, sensed she had just crossed paths with a man whose silence carried more danger than words. Neither of them knew that one accident would bind their futures in ways neither power nor pride could undo. Success has a strange way of attracting both admiration and enemies. 3 days after the hotel incident, Nia Carter received news that threatened everything she had built. Her company's primary investor, the one who had promised international expansion capital, had vanished overnight. Accounts were frozen. Contracts were suspended. Lawsuits loomed like dark clouds over her dreams. In a foreign country with limited allies, the timing felt deliberate. What Nia didn't know was that her investor hadn't disappeared by coincidence. He had been pressured, strategically, quietly, by forces who believed she was becoming too influential too quickly. That evening, she was summoned to a private dining suite at the very hotel she was negotiating with. Waiting inside was Joon-Woo. Gone was the mild amusement from their first meeting. In its place stood a man composed, calculating, and disturbingly informed. "You're about to lose everything," he said without preamble. Nia stiffened. "You seem very confident about that." "I know things," he replied simply. He explained that powerful individuals were testing her resilience. In global business, and in his world, strength had to be proven. Then he made the offer. A contractual marriage. Publicly, it would secure his image as a family-oriented businessman transitioning into legitimate enterprise. For her, it would provide immediate financial protection, restored investor confidence, and immunity from those targeting her company. Nia stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to marry you, for strategy?" "I want partnership," he corrected. "Temporary. Mutually beneficial." She stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "I don't belong to anyone's plan." For a moment, something like respect flickered across his face. "Think carefully," he said quietly. "Independence is powerful. But protection can be priceless." That night, as legal threats escalated and her accounts remained inaccessible, Nia faced a choice she never imagined: pride or survival. And Joon-Woo waited, patient as ever, knowing bold women rarely run from calculated risks. Some marriages begin with vows. Theirs began with terms and conditions. The wedding was elegant, strategic, and watched by powerful eyes across Seoul. Cameras flashed as Nia Carter stood beside Joon-Woo in a gown that symbolized unity, though their hearts remained guarded behind polished smiles. To the public they were a modern power couple. To each other they were strangers bound by agreement. Nia moved into his estate overlooking the Han River, a mansion that felt more like a fortress than a home. Staff bowed. Security rotated in silent precision. Every hallway echoed with discipline. Joon-Woo kept his distance. They ate at the same long dining table but at opposite ends. Conversations were formal. Business updates, scheduled appearances, strategic appearances at charity events. He fulfilled his part of the agreement efficiently. Her company's funds were restored and investor confidence returned almost instantly. The world assumed she had married into influence. What they didn't see were the quiet evenings. One night, unable to sleep, Nia wandered into the library and found him there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, reading alone. For a moment he looked less like a feared leader and more like a tired man carrying invisible weight. "You don't sleep much," she observed. "Leaders who sleep too deeply lose everything," he replied. She studied him carefully. "You don't have to be guarded around me. I'm not your enemy." The statement lingered. Days passed and walls shifted, subtly. He began asking her opinions about expanding certain hotel branches legitimately. She challenged him respectfully, suggesting long-term stability over intimidation-based loyalty. Then came the thunderstorm. Lightning cracked violently across the sky, plunging part of the mansion into temporary darkness. The sudden roar startled her. Instinct overrode pride. She stepped closer, fingers gripping his arm. He felt the tremor in her hand. Without thinking, he pulled her into a steady embrace, protective, firm, and unexpectedly warm. Neither spoke. But in that silent moment, something shifted. The contract remained. Yet the space between them felt smaller than before. Fear builds empires. But it does not build loyalty. Nia learned quickly that Joon-Woo's world ran on silence and obedience. Men bowed not because they respected him, but because they feared disappointing him. Meetings inside the estate were sharp, efficient, and void of warmth. Decisions were made in clipped tones. No one questioned him. Until she did. One afternoon, after overhearing raised voices in his private office, Nia entered without hesitation. A young subordinate stood trembling before Joon-Woo, awaiting punishment for a failed negotiation. "Leave us," Nia said calmly. The room froze. No one dismissed his men except him. Joon-Woo studied her for a long moment, then nodded. The guards exited. "You undermine me," he said once they were alone. "No," she replied steadily. "I'm protecting your future." She walked closer, her voice firm but not cruel. "Fear works short-term. Respect lasts longer." He had built his empire believing vulnerability was weakness. Yet this woman, bound to him by contract, challenged him without trembling. "You speak as if you understand my world," he said quietly. "I understand people," she answered. The conversation stayed with him. Over the following weeks he adjusted small things, consulting rather than commanding, rewarding loyalty publicly, reducing unnecessary harshness. His cousin Min-jae noticed the change immediately. "She influences you," Min-jae observed. Joon-Woo didn't deny it. Then came the night everything nearly shattered. A violent confrontation erupted with a rival faction across the city. Hours passed without word. Nia paced the mansion floor, anxiety twisting in her chest. When he finally walked through the doors, suit wrinkled, expression hardened, she didn't think. She ran to him. Her arms wrapped around him tightly, relief pouring through her. He stiffened at first, and used to such open emotion. Then slowly he allowed himself to return the embrace. In her arms he felt something unfamiliar again. Not fear. Not control. But peace. And for the first time, Joon-Woo began to wonder whether the contract that bound them had quietly turned into something far more dangerous. Something real. Power had never frightened Nia the way motherhood did. 2 years after their strategic wedding, the mansion that once echoed with silence now carried the soft cries of newborn twins, Ji-hoon and Ji-ae. A boy and a girl. Perfectly small. Perfectly loud. Perfectly life-changing. The announcement stunned Seoul's elite circles. The feared Joon-Woo was now a father. And he was nothing like anyone expected. The man who once ruled through calculated distance now stood awkwardly beside bassinets, studying the fragile rise and fall of 2 tiny chests as if they were priceless artifacts. He learned how to hold them with careful strength. He dismissed meetings early to sit quietly beside their cribs. When Jie wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb for the first time, something inside him shifted permanently. Nia watched it happen. "You're smiling," she teased softly one evening. "I am not," he replied, though he clearly was. For a while the estate felt warmer. Laughter replaced tension. Even the staff moved lighter, as if the twins' presence softened the air itself. But outside those walls, whispers began. Rival factions murmured that fatherhood had weakened him. Investors questioned whether emotional attachments could compromise his authority. Enemies watched for cracks in his armor. Pressure returned, heavier than before. Late nights grew more frequent. Security doubled. Meetings stretched longer. Nia noticed the change first. He still loved his children. That was unquestionable. But the weight of leadership began creeping back into his shoulders. His smiles grew shorter. His patience thinner. One evening she found him staring out over the city lights, jaw tight. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she told him gently. He didn't answer immediately. I cannot afford weakness, he said at last. Nia stepped closer, placing the twins' baby monitor in his hand. That's not weakness, she replied. That's responsibility. For a brief moment, he leaned into her, just slightly, allowing himself to rest his forehead against hers. It was only a quiet hug, but it felt like a fragile promise. A promise that the world outside would not break what they were building inside. Neither of them realized how quickly pressure could turn into something far more destructive. Stress does not knock before entering a home. It seeps through cracks no one notices. The twins were barely 6 months old when the pressure around Joon-Woo intensified. A rival syndicate challenged one of his territories. Investors demanded reassurance. Rumors spread that fatherhood had softened his edge. Every whisper felt like a threat to the empire he had spent years building. And inside the mansion, exhaustion lingered like heavy air. Nia had not slept properly in weeks. Late-night feedings, business calls with Atlanta, and adjusting to her changing body left her drained. She rarely looked in mirrors anymore, not from shame but from lack of time. Her world revolved around Ji-hoon and Jie. One evening, Joon-Woo returned home later than usual. His tie was loosened, jaw clenched, frustration barely contained. A meeting had gone badly. Loyalty had been questioned. He entered the nursery to find Nia rocking both twins gently, humming under her breath. You missed dinner, she said softly, not accusing, just stating fact. I was handling something important, he replied sharply. Silence followed. She stood carefully, placing the twins in their crib. You've been distant. He exhaled harshly. You don't understand what's at stake. And you don't understand what I'm carrying either, she answered, exhaustion finally cracking her calm tone. Something snapped. The frustration he had bottled for weeks spilled out in one careless moment. You've changed, he said coldly. You're not the same. You've let yourself go. You're fat and ugly now. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Even the twins fell quiet. Nia did not gasp. She did not scream. She simply looked at him, long, steady, wounded in a way deeper than anger. Then she nodded once. I see, she whispered. Without another word, she walked past him and left the room. For the first time since their contract began, Joon-Woo felt something worse than fear. He felt regret. But pride is a stubborn companion. And sometimes silence does more damage than shouting ever could. Silence can be louder than any argument. After that night, Nia stopped trying to bridge the distance. She moved through the mansion with calm precision, feeding the twins, answering business calls, attending scheduled appearances, but the warmth that once softened the halls was gone. She no longer waited for him by the window. No longer asked about his meetings. No longer reached for his hand. Joon-Woo noticed. He told himself she needed time. That strong women processed pain quietly. That things would return to normal. They didn't. One morning he walked into the nursery and found suitcases neatly lined by the door. Ji-hoon and Jie were already dressed. Nia stood beside them, composed as ever. You're traveling? He asked, though he already sensed the truth. Yes, she replied evenly. We're going home. Home is here. No, she corrected gently. This was an agreement. Atlanta is my home. The word struck deeper than he expected. You're leaving because of one argument? His voice carried restrained disbelief. I'm leaving because respect should not be negotiable, she said. You don't get to break someone and call it stress. For a moment, pride urged him to command her to stay, to remind her who he was. But something in her eyes stopped him. Disappointment. She lifted Jie into her arms, adjusting the baby's blanket with quiet care. Ji-hoon reached toward his father instinctively, tiny fingers stretching. Joon-Woo hesitated, then stepped forward, holding his son close. The embrace was brief, fragile. When will you return? He asked, softer now. When we are valued, she answered. The estate felt cavernous after they left. No lullabies. No small laughter. No gentle humming. Min-jae found him later that evening, staring at the empty nursery. You built an empire, his cousin said quietly. But you may have just lost your family. For the first time, Joon-Woo understood that power could not command love to stay. And the absence of Nia Carter was louder than any rival threat. It took almost losing everything for Joon-Woo to understand what truly mattered. Weeks after Nia left for Atlanta, the cracks in his empire widened. Rivals grew bold, sensing instability. One calculated ambush during a late-night inspection nearly ended his life. Steel and chaos surrounded him, and for a split second, lying on cold pavement beneath flashing lights, he didn't think about territory. He thought about Ji-hoon's tiny grip. He thought about Jae's sleepy smile. He thought about Nia walking away without tears. Recovery confined him to a hospital suite under heavy security. The silence there felt different from the mansion's emptiness. It was heavier. Honest. Min-jae stood near the window one afternoon. "You're feared," he said plainly. "But fear doesn't visit hospital rooms." Joon-Woo didn't respond. Instead, he replayed the moment in the nursery, the look in Nia's eyes. Not anger. Not hatred. Just quiet hurt. He had fought entire organizations without trembling. Yet he had wounded the only person who had ever stood beside him without fear. Days later, against advisement, he boarded a private flight to Atlanta. Not as a mafia boss. Not as a strategist. But as a husband who had failed. Nia was hosting a major fashion gala. Her brand now thriving independently, celebrated for promoting confidence and authenticity. She stood radiant beneath soft lights, speaking about resilience and redefining beauty after motherhood. He watched from the back of the room before stepping forward. The murmurs began instantly. He didn't care. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her face, but she remained composed. "I came to apologize," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the room. "Not privately. Not strategically. Publicly." Silence spread. "I spoke from insecurity and pressure. I attacked the very strength that built this family. You were never less. I was." For once there was no calculated tone. No authority. Just truth. And in that vulnerable moment, Kang Joon-Woo realized redemption was not about reclaiming control. It was about earning trust, one humble step at a time. Healing is never instant. It is earned through patience, trust, and action. After his public apology at Nia's gala, Kang Joon-Woo understood that words alone could not repair the wounds he had caused. Atlanta became more than a destination. It was a chance to prove, in small but consistent ways, that he could change. He stayed in the city, not as a powerful mob boss, but as a husband committed to mending the family he had fractured. Mornings began with quiet breakfasts, watching Ji-hoon and Jae play on soft carpets, their laughter filling spaces that had once felt hollow. Nia allowed him proximity but carefully, cautiously. She watched, measured, and observed his dedication. He attended therapy sessions, initially reluctantly, but soon began sharing more than just regrets. He began sharing fears, frustrations, and hopes. Every meeting, every conversation with Nia, every act of consistency chipped away the walls they had built between them. One afternoon, Nia placed the twins in his arms while she tended to paperwork. He held them with the gentleness he had once thought impossible for a man in his position. Just tiny fingers curled around his thumb. Ji-hoon leaned his head against his chest. She approached slowly, silently observing the connection. Then, with a tentative but meaningful gesture, she allowed him to hug her. It was brief, hesitant, careful, but it was real. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time in months, he felt a measure of forgiveness flow from her warmth. "I'm proud of you," she whispered softly. He held her tighter, silently promising to never repeat the mistakes of the past. There were no grand declarations, no dramatics. Only quiet, steady steps toward trust and partnership. For the first time, Kang Joon-Woo understood that love was not about control or fear. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other, even after everything had been broken. The mansion no longer felt empty. Laughter, soft conversations, and hugs had begun to reclaim it, one moment at a time. Time has a way of teaching lessons no one is ready for, and forgiveness, when chosen, transforms everything. Years had passed since Nia Carter left Seoul with the twins. Her fashion empire flourished internationally, and she had grown into a confident woman who no longer measured herself by others' opinions. Kang Joon-Woo, once feared across 2 continents, had fully restructured his empire into legitimate enterprises. Violence was replaced by diplomacy, intimidation by respect, and fear by integrity. The family celebration that evening was modest but full of warmth. Ji-hoon and Jae ran around the garden, laughter spilling into the golden glow of sunset. Nia stood beside Joon-Woo, watching the twins chase each other with carefree joy. He slipped a hand around hers, careful, deliberate, silently asking permission. She didn't hesitate. "You were never anything less than powerful," he whispered close to her ear. She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "And you were never beyond change." They embraced longer this time. No contracts, no fear, no distance. Just a quiet promise. One built on mistakes, growth, and resilience. Around them, the twins climbed into their laps, giggling, and the world felt lighter than it had in years. As night settled, Lanterns glowing softly overhead, Joon-Woo and Nia sat side by side, watching the city lights in the distance. They had learned that love was not about perfection. It was about patience, accountability, and choosing each other every single day. The past, the harsh words, the arguments, the distance, remained only as reminders of what they had overcome. What they shared now was stronger than fear, stronger than pride. In each other's arms they found home. In the laughter of their twins they found joy. And in their hearts they found forever. Theirs was not a story of flawless beginnings, but a story of deliberate choices, healing and love that endured every trial.